If you run a 7 or 8 figure e-commerce brand and you want to start split testing, or you're already split testing, you must know and understand these 3 main CRO concepts. This video was prompted by daily calls I have with brand owners and my own e-commerce clients, which we split test for on a weekly basis to increase conversion rate and AOV, who asked me to understand CRO on a much more foundational level and its main concepts and what makes it so good to scale your brand. Let's start with a common situation, which is a brand running a split test. So let's say they're running an A/B test on their product page. So we have the control here, which is A, and the variation, which is B. And they're seeing that B here is detecting a 15% improvement, let's say in CVR. So they're getting a 15% improvement in CVR. Now, obviously you see this, you say, okay, this looks promising, and it looks promising because you're seeing a 15% improvement in CVR. But how do we make sure that we can trust this 15% improvement? Here comes into play the first and probably most important concept about all of CRO, which is statistical significance, or for short, stat-sig, which is how you will find it written on many split testing and A/B testing platforms. Statistical significance very simply tells you how confident can you be that this improvement is actually caused by B being better and not by random numerical chance or random numerical variability. You have to remember that most of e-commerce, or we can say all of e-commerce, is mostly a numbers game, and CRO is no different. It is also a numbers game. So we need to abide by the law of maths. We need to abide by maths. And so here, statistical significance, what it tells you is how confident in a percentage. So this here, statistical significance is calculated and displayed as a percentage. How confident as a percentage number can you be that this improvement is caused by B actually being better and not just by random chance? Now, the bare minimum percentage you should go for here to make sure that you're confident that B is actually better is 90%. The standard is actually 95%, but I would suggest you at least use as a bare minimum 90%. So here we are saying basically that we need to be 90% confident that B is actually 15% better on CVR than A, and not just a random numerical chance that it's performing better. So how do we calculate statistical significance? This is where the second concept about CRO comes into play, which is sample sizes. Sample sizes very simply is the amount of traffic, the amount of visitors you actually get through the test, you actually get through the variation. And there's a big difference here about like how we can make sure that this is actually significant. So let's consider a few examples here. Let's say you have 100 visitors and you have this going through the split test. So you have 50 visitors here, since it's an A/B test. You have 50 visitors going to your control and 50 visitors going to your variation. Now, this is not significant at all. The reason is that 100 more visitors, so if we make this 200, could completely change the results you're seeing here. And the reason is if you had, for example, let's say 300 visitors per month, in the entire month, 300 visitors coming through to your PDP, then maybe this would be actually significant. But chances are you probably have a lot more than 300 visitors per month coming through your store. And even then, if you have only 300 visitors coming into your PDP per month, you have a lot more things to prioritize rather than CRO. And CRO is not something you should be doing at this level right here. So how do we actually calculate the sample size we need to make sure that we are 90% confident that B performs better? This depends on the improvement you expect to detect. Now, this is probably the only arbitrary thing about all of these concepts right here that we're going to go through. Sample size is based on the percentage difference, the percentage impact you expect to detect in your test. Now, this is varied obviously by a lot of different things. If you're testing, let's say, a major layout shift, so something like, for example, testing completely your PDP layout, something like that, then here you can maybe expect a big change that could be in the realm of 20+%, something like that. If you're changing something like that. If you're changing, for example, the copy on your call to action, so CTA copy, you'd expect obviously a much smaller change. So something in the realm probably of, let's say, for example, 5 to 10%. There is other kind of tests you would expect maybe a little bit bigger than changing CTA copy, but smaller than changing your entire PDP layout, where you can expect something like between 10% to 20%. So something something like that. But obviously you're not going to get this right. So you can give kind of a range depending on how big the change is. So something very big would be 20 plus percent impact. Something small would be 5 to 10%. Something in the middle would be between 10 to 20%. So you're not going to get this right. This is just an expectation that you have about the test. If the change is big, you expect it to impact your metrics much more. And this, by the way, is both in positive and negative. So if you do a big PDP change, it could influence your metrics both 20% up, so better, 20% better, or 20% worse. So you need to expect that in both cases, and this is true obviously for all of the tests right here. As I mentioned, you're not going to get this 100% right. So you calculate the sample size based on the expected improvement from the test. Now, how do you actually use the numbers here to reach the number, the actual sample you need? To do it, we need three things: your baseline conversion rate, so CVR here. Let's say we are starting from a baseline conversion rate of 2%. How big of an impact you actually want to detect, which is what I mentioned here with the different changes and different impact they have. So let's say we are making a big test right here, we're making a big change. We expect to detect a 20% improvement. And the third one is how confident we want to be that this improvement is actually significant and not just random chance or random statistical chance. And this is statistical significance, which is what I mentioned in the first step. And we want to be, let's say, 95% confident that this test is actually significant. Now, this is a rather complicated formula, so obviously I'm not going to go through actual maths and formulas to calculate this, but we're going to use one of the many sample size calculators for A/B testing you can find online. You can just simply search on Google A/B test sample size calculator, and this will help you find that number. And even then, you don't even need to use these calculators, because with A/B testing platforms like Intelligence, which is what we use for our clients at the agency, or the many others out there like Convert.com, which we use for clients for us that are not on Shopify, for example, VWO, Optimizely, A/B Tasty. Many of these platforms have these things already integrated in the platform itself, so you don't need to actually take time to take a calculator and calculate it yourself, but the platform will do it for you. But just to understand how this works, we're going to use a calculator here from A/B Tasty. So let's use the actual numbers we've mentioned. So conversion rate, we are starting from a baseline of 2%. Minimum detectable effect, which is how big of a change we expect to detect, 20%. And statistical significance, we have mentioned 95%. Statistical power, you don't need to really care about this. 80% is the default, is the standard. It's basically the sensitivity of the test to a change in the metrics, but you don't need to really care about it since it's locked at 80%. So by inputting all of these numbers right here, we see that the required number of tested visitors per variation. So if you're doing an A/B test, you need 19,784 visitors per variation. So this is a little bit, it's around 40,000 visitors in total for the test. And let's make this even better and considering two examples. For example, brand A with 100,000 visitors per month and brand B with 1 million visitors per month. If with these numbers you're getting 100,000 visitors per month on your PDP, which is what we are testing right now, then your average daily visitors is 3,333. The number of variations is 2, the control and the variation, to have a big enough sample size to detect a statistically significant change at 95% confidence. You require 11 days of testing at the very minimum to make sure the test is significant. Now, for a brand that has 1 million visitors per month, for example, it will add simply a 3 here, and the required duration in days would become 1. Now, why this big difference between the two numbers? So if you have 100,000 visitors per month, and if you have 1 million visitors per month, do you actually test this change right here for 11 days in the first case and for 1 day in the second case? That's not how you actually want to go about it. Obviously, the more visitors you have, the more you can afford to run the test for less days, because you can detect a change much faster. But this is no different, for example, than flipping a coin. Down the analogy with flipping a coin is that if you flip a coin 5 times, let's say, and you get heads 4 times and you get tail 1 time, you might say that it's much more likely to get heads than tails, because when you see these results, you say, okay, I've gotten 4 here and 1 here, it's much more likely to get heads. But if you flip this coin, instead of 5 times, you flip it 1,000 times, you're much more likely for the split to be 50% rather than the big difference that you have here. This is the exact same concept we are using here for split testing, and it's the difference between the example we've made about 100,000 visitors per month and 1 million visitors per month. You need, based on the amount of visitors you have, to have a big enough sample size and enough visitors and traffic to go through the test to make sure that the detected change is significant at the confidence level you require here and at the impact you expect to be detecting from the change. Now, this obviously is a lot of complicated things, a lot of numbers and maths here. You don't need to actually do most of these things manually, as I've mentioned. If you use A/B testing platforms, a lot of this stuff will be automatically handled by your tool, by whatever you're using to test. But it's important to know these things, like how split testing and CRO works actually behind the scenes, so you know like how long to run the test. You can kind of eyeball if a test is significant, if it's not, if you need to run it for a few more days, if you have enough data to make a decision. This is super important because this makes the difference between categorizing a test as a winning test or as a losing test. So you need to at least understand these things and how split testing works behind the scenes, so you can make decisions that make sense and are actually improving your metrics and helping your brand scale. Now, one question that I want to actually connect with these things. So we've talked about statistical significance, we've talked about sample sizes, we've talked about the minimum detectable effect here. So 3 of the most important CRO concepts. One question I get a lot when I explain these things is, so can we run multiple tests at a time? So there's different answers to this question. This heavily depends on the amount of visitors you're getting. So if we use the example that we've just made, so a brand with 100k visitors per month, and let's say we have the other brand doing 1 million visitors per month, as we've seen, the difference in days we need for the sample size to be enough for the test to be statistically significant. Here it was 11 days, so we need 11 days here, and here it was 1 day with the same starting metrics. This means that obviously, since you have much more traffic to play with, you can much more easily run multiple split tests at a time when you have 1 million visitors per month. But this doesn't mean that you can do the same when you have 100,000 visitors per month. The only thing that will differ here is that if you run 2 tests at the same time when you have 1 million visitors per month, this amount of days to be significant will increase, but it will not increase by a lot. It will maybe increase by 2 or 3 days. So instead of being significant in 1 day, if you run 2 tests at the same time, you'll be maybe significant on both. Like each will take maybe, for example, 3 days. So 3 days here and 3 days here. This is not the exact number, but just to give you an idea. But if you run 2 tests at the same time here, the time you need to be significant, the sample size you need to become significant, will be exponentially larger than 11 days. So maybe even 20 days or something like that. The difference is just the sheer amount of traffic you need to make sure that the test is significant. And this doesn't mean that you can't do it, as I've said, but you can do it, but you need to make sure that when you're testing multiple things at a time, that the traffic doesn't mix between the 2 tests. So you need to exclude, if you're going to run multiple tests at a time, you need to exclude the traffic of a test from each other. So if you're running 2 tests, for example, let's say you have a PDP test here. So let's say we have a PDP test here. And let's say we have, for example, a cart test here, and you're sending your traffic, you're sending your 100,000 visitors to both tests. So this is the traffic coming from ads. You're sending it to both tests here. What you need to do is make sure that if someone here in the PDP test, we have the contra and the variation. In the cart test, we have the contra and the variation. We need to make sure that if one person, so let's say we have a person here and this is their journey, so they come from ads, they go through the PDP, and they actually see the variation on the PDP, they cannot see and they must not see the cart test. This is because if, for example, this visitor right here, one of the visitors goes through the PDP test, goes through the variation, and then goes also through the cart test and sees also the variation here. So after the PDP, they click on the CTA and they go through the B variation on the cart test. At the end, if this visitor actually ends up converting, so if this becomes a conversion. So we have a conversion event here. What happens is both tests on the A/B tool you're using, both tests will be attributed the conversion. So here one conversion will be added for B, and here one conversion will be added for B, but you don't actually know for a fact where the conversion happened. And this is because if the user goes through a change on your PDP and goes through a change on your cart, what was the actual between the two changes? What was the actual change that made this person convert? If you separate the traffic, if you exclude the traffic from each test, they are not going to see the cart test. So what happens here is no more conversion, no more cart test. They simply see the control cart, just like what you had before running tests. So they go through the variation here on the PDP, and then they skip the cart test. If they end up converting, you know for sure that the conversion is given by the fact that you made this change here on the PDP, and it's not influenced by the fact that you have a change here on the cart. This is super important for split testing for CRO, because you need to single out changes. You need to make sure that the reason someone is converting, when you send enough traffic to make sure that your test is significant, you need to make sure that that single change was the reason that made that prospect convert. So that's the reason why, if you want to run multiple tests at the same time, you need to take those two things into consideration. First is that it will take you more time to make sure you're significant, that the test is actually significant. Second is that you're excluding the traffic from each of the tests from each other. So you make sure that the change, the singled out change you make, is actually what's causing the prospect to convert. That was it for today's video. You should now understand much better how CRO works and how to make it worthwhile. If you run a 7 or 8 figure DTC e-commerce brand, then you can book a discovery call with me with the first link in the description. And on the call, I will show you the split testing strategy we've implemented for dozens of 7 and 8 figure brands to increase conversion rate, AOV, revenue per visitor, and overall profitability, to help them scale much faster and much more easily in 2025. So book a discovery call with the first link in the description. Also subscribe to my newsletter with the second link in the description. And in the first email, if you do that today, you will receive a 60-page PDF on my specific split testing strategy and how you can implement it from A to Z, step by step, for your brand. See you in the next video.